Hello, I'm Rory Smith. Before you listen to this episode, please be aware it comes with a content warning. This episode is for adults only and includes conversations around child abuse, child sexual abuse, violence, substance use and other mature themes that some people may find disturbing and or triggering. This message is to empower you with the knowledge you need to make healthy decisions about how and if you should consume the content in this episode. Before listening, please read the episode description. Listener discretion is advised. In part 1.
I felt like something was wrong with me because I'm not happy and excited to participate
In
sexual activities with Don, Jody. I just remember being in the car, he and I, and him looking at me through the rear view mirror and saying, "So I heard you were molested, just don't make a big deal about it." He said that, "I'm doing this for you and your sister, although I may have been the only one present, because I don't want you to grow up to be frigid." And I had the wherewithal to ask my dad for a hug, and he said, "No, I'm not going to hug you because I don't want your brother and sister who are adopted to feel, like I'm favoring you." And she's like, but she kind of had like a look on her face, a different look, like sad or something, and said, "Here is, these detectives, Detective Mendoza, Detective Rubio, here to talk to you." And I just...
What did they say to you?
So they asked me, "Do you know Don Gordon and Jody Jones?" Conflicted, confused, but yeah.
Is there a sense as well of, at that age, almost wanting to protect those people around you because you don't want people to get in trouble?
Yeah. I mean, it's in other communities, I guess you hear the word snitch, snitch is the worst thing. That term wasn't used, when I was a child, but yeah, I felt that I would be doing wrong.
When they told you that you would have to go to a shelter home, how did that make you feel?
I was really confused. And honestly, I don't even know, like, I could even have much time to think. But they asked me about my mom, and did my mom know? And yeah. And also, by the way, today she's picking me up from school. So they said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And so one of them went out and got her and brought her in, and at the office, like, we're not in the room anymore, where people come in to sign in, sign out. And she sees me and she's like, big drama, right? "Lisa, oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me?" And like hugs me, and I was just like, again, I don't know what to say. I'm shocked, surprised, like, tell you what? Like, what do you mean? I don't know. But she was hugging me. And I years later, as I was like processing through this, I realized it was so surprising because she never initiated hugs with me. But also telling me, why didn't I tell her? Like, I just always felt wrong. I'm doing something wrong. Like, no matter what I do, I'm in the wrong. But anyway, that was it. They took me to the shelter home. And but then one day Detective Mendoza told me that I had to go back home. He's sorry. He said my mom is the worst kind of abuser, but they can't prove it or something. Wow. But to let him know if anything happens again. And then I get home, and I don't remember what happened, but my mom was just an awful emotional abuser, just the worst things. And "You're not my daughter." She would like put my baby book in a box, give it to me, get out. I was kicked out a lot from little age.
Were you scared about going back home at that time, or relieved to get out of the shelter home?
I don't know. I probably relieved in some way. I remember being in the foster home and wanting to go back home because I felt so lonely, and I didn't have as much access to drugs and alcohol, or weed and alcohol, and just my own freedom. Like I did have friends I could go to, but at this point, it's just party friends. Who can get high, who can get me high, who can I, get weed from, whatever. We were just all getting high or drunk together.
And I suppose in some way, you have that hope inside of you that things won't be the same.
Yeah, I was just talking about this to my therapist yesterday. I remember always kind of just having like this optimistic, like, I don't know, like not a resentment held towards my mom as a child. Like she would be mad and raging and be crying hysterically. I get kicked out, whatever. I come back and it's just like, let's just move on from here. I always kind of just felt that way. Like I'm good to go. We can just go on from here. But I think a lot of it was just, I'm just in the moment. I'm just in survival.
Later, you were taken to Orange County, and this goes back to that photographer that Dawn introduced you to. What did they tell you there?
Yeah, so I was in the shelter home, and Riverside County is different than Orange County. So most of the case was in Orange County because Santa Ana. And so anyway, they took me to Orange County to be interviewed by Orange County detective. And the Orange County detective just said to me, "Oh, hey, do you know where this photographer is?" He must have had pictures of us or something, and said, because he knew that I knew about a photographer. And he said that Dawn and Jody didn't know. They said that they didn't know where the photographer was, but did I know where the photographer was? And before I had a chance to tell him, yeah, I memorized how to get there, he just says, he is wanted in the murder of 2 children.
Wow.
And he kind of proceeded to tell me that, well, a girl was found in 2 places, and then a boy was tied up, and that it was filmed. And I so shocking, right? But I told him, well, yeah, I memorized how to get there. He said, "You did?" I said, "Yeah, I can take you." He said, "Let's go right now." So we did. Him and I think another detective and me, and I'm like, 7th Street, 14th Street, however. And that's the building, and there's the studio. And we went right up to the studio, and he knocks on the door. I remember thinking, is he going to kill me? Or if the photographer sees that it's me, something like that. Kind of like, wow, am I in danger now? But no answer. And, they didn't bust the door down. We just went back. They thanked me, and that was it. But I did wonder, like, did the photographer see me? I remember being in the shelter home, like, what? Don and Jody? Like, they took me to a photographer that kills kids? I thought they loved me because that is what they told me. And, that they love me.
Did you believe them?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Do you know whatever happened to that photographer?
I wish I did. I really feel that they should have told me. They should have kept me updated. I know I've heard people say, well, they're just trying to protect you or don't want to stir things up. Well, that's not how things ended up anyway, but I should have known. I should have been told. Somebody should have asked me how I felt about any of it. But what I did have, I feel like, was a God moment where I was watching TV, I don't know, a few months later, 6 months later, something. And there was this editorial newscaster, Hal Fishman, in Southern California, talking about a child pornographer, I don't know if he said killer, but that was busted because of the courage of a victim. And I have no idea if it's the same guy, right? But I felt like that was something meant for me to hear.
You mentioned a God moment, as you describe it. How did religion become more prevalent in your life to result in a hugely pivotal moment?
Well, I had, who I called a boyfriend at the time, but he was a perpetrator because I was 15 when we officially, got together, and he was 25. But his family were Christians and were very kind to me. Like, I told his family at first, I'm like, not really interested. I only, my parents, my mom especially, was like, Christians are hypocrites and, all that. And you just see these preachers on TV with pink hair and a lot of makeup. It just didn't really feel good, But when I started studying with these people, and I started to feel different, and I was looked at differently.
Did that begin to change how you viewed yourself?
Yes. Well, I knew that I was a child of God, and I could pray and receive answers, and I did. And of course, then I remembered, whoa, on the way to the photographer's studio. Of course, I have had questions where, well, why am I, this was more later a little bit in life, like, well, why was I maybe not loved as much as other little girls that were not put in these same molestation circles? But I just feel and felt that I am loved as much, just different people have different circumstances, and everything is taken into consideration, and you can still get guidance and help. And of course, whatever we go through it's not good. Like, it's not. Molestation's not, rape is not, etc. But everything God can use for good, in the sense of I can understand his role in my life. I can empathize with others who've been through similar paths. We can help each other. So.
And this led you down a different path from one that you were raised in. a path that led you to your husband, also a Christian guy.
Yeah.
And at this stage, you're happily married with one child. You start to go to college to train as a therapist. And you start to get in touch with your anger, old feelings. And this, for you, meant that a part of that meant that you would confront your father. And that's not something that everyone who's been abused has to do, should do. This is just your story. You felt that you needed to do that. Why did you feel that, and what was his reaction?
Right. Yeah, I don't recommend everybody do that because it can, ultimately safety, but nobody hardly will ever validate you anyway. But yeah, I got in touch with rage. I realized, Freud says depression turned inwards, or anger turned inwards is depression, and I don't know. I needed to put the feelings where they belonged, and I started just getting clarity, like, oh my gosh, all this happened to me, like what? It just became clearer and clearer. It's a process. It just doesn't happen at once. And so I went to try to confront everyone, but I couldn't find Larry. I couldn't find John. But, at that point, I at least, my father, I was like, where the hell was he? And I remembered that he said not to make a big deal about being molested. Plus, when we would go to his house, he always had like pornography and things. And so I went to confront him as basically being a neglectful father because it's his job to protect me. And so I started to tell him what happened, different experience. And he said, oh, wow, you had quite an extensive sex life. I mean, and I'm standing there, I feel like my jaw, is dropped, trying to understand, like, what I just heard. Thinking, of course, no, it's not sex, that's molestation, or, like, what am I going to say? Or, like, what did you just say? And then he immediately goes on and says, and children under the age of 3 don't remember. And I didn't say anything about under the age of 3. I have some memories that I just categorize as, I don't know. So I just accept that there's something I don't know, and I still do the inner child work with it, but they're in a different category because I just don't know. But you got to learn to trust yourself and your body and do your healing regardless. But anyway, I never said anything to him about anything previous to John. And so I was really, again, just kind of stunned. And the conversation, he just said, well, I have to go. And that was it. Honestly, I don't think I said anything else to him. I know it sounds really weird, especially I think back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, but I still try to be a good daughter to my parents. I never left my children alone with him. One time I did with my oldest son with my mom, but I did not leave my children alone with my parents otherwise. And because I did start to hear, that my father liked to molest boys, and but I'm not sure at what point I heard that, but I would still kind of interact with my father, maybe just me one-on-one and stuff. And he, as an adult, knowing I'm a Christian woman at this point too, especially, would just say very inappropriate things to me. One thing, this is the most mild thing he said to me, because he would frequent West Hollywood. He said, Lisa, I was in West Hollywood and I saw your name, my maiden name, Lisa Bear, on like this pornography studio, whatever, or theater.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I was gonna go in and watch it, but I didn't have the time. So like, was that you? Or something like that. Like excited.
Oh.
And again, I didn't, like, what? No. But
Did you eventually have to cut him out of your life?
yes.
Yeah.
It became clear to me when my brother told me that he molested him. So at this point, my brother was not well. I picked him up he had an episode and had to be hospitalized for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been going to sexual abuse groups, recovery groups and stuff, and just, still coming to terms with my own abuse. And I told, Christmas was coming up, and I made a decision to uninvite my father because I had invited my brother and his family. I am not going to be the one to bring perpetrator and victim together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, I was definitely turned on even more by my family, my brother too, who also abused me. But so I just became, I don't know, I guess I'm the unreasonable one, or I'm overreacting. My dad said I'm an asshole, and I just, oh well.
Mm-hmm. Is your dad still alive?
No.
No.
Neither of my parents are.
Okay. What was your relationship in adulthood with your mum?
She didn't ever change as far as her extreme emotional swings and rages and mean, so gratefully, my husband was the main provider, and I had stability in that because I don't think I would have been able to provide for myself. I'd like to think I could have, but I don't know. I mean, I supplemented the income and stuff, but my point is I had a support system where I didn't have to fall back on my parents, which is a terrible place to be. And so I don't know, I thought as a Christian, you have to honor your mother and father. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I had interactions with her, but they were always bad. My husband would come home. He's like, you interacted with your parents today, didn't you? I can tell. So I had to cut that off more and more, but it was really hard. I was confused. Never did the sexual abuse ever come up from her end, like what she did with Larry. What did she do with Don and Jody? How did that go? We didn't have those conversations at all. I asked my mom if she was ever sexually abused because I was concluding that she must have been.
Mm-hmm.
No, never was. But that's a whole nother, I don't believe, but.
So you never confronted her about it?
Not never. I did.
Mm-hmm.
One time I did actually ask her. I was in the backyard and I asked her about that situation with Larry and the vibrator. And I'm like, I did actually, Mom, why? Why did you give that to me? Why did you do that with Larry? And she was like, shh, Lisa, shh, because people were in their backyards too. So I got louder.
Mm-hmm.
And she just, Lisa, I don't know. She didn't ever really respond.
Did you eventually cut her out too?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
It was less and less. We ended up moving away from Riverside, about an hour. And, but I always felt like this aching, sad, feel like I'm that little girl trying to comfort her still. But I spoke to a spiritual leader. And I was like, I'm supposed to honor my parents, Like, how do I reconcile this? What does this mean? And he said to me, knowing, I guess, some of my story, you honor them by living a good life. You don't basically need to be interacting with them.
Mm-hmm.
that helped me at the time.
Mm-hmm. Whatever happened to Dawn and Jody? What happened to them in the end?
Well, so Dawn, they both went to prison for molesting me and other girls, but I can't speak to those cases. I don't know. From what I heard, Dawn got 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
He pled out, but what ended up happening is he only served 5. Jody, I remember being in the courtroom because my mom made me go. She got a year, and she was supposed to register as a sex offender. And of course he was.
Was there a moment when you fully accepted, looking back, that there was never anything wrong with you, that none of this was your fault?
A moment, yes. I mean, I actually do have like a specific moment. I would hear throughout my life and my healing journey, I'd be in and out of therapy and such, like, oh, you need to forgive yourself. Well, forgiveness is a touchy subject.
Mm-hmm.
And forgive myself, like what? But what happens is we don't, as children, have the capability to, we don't have the experience, we don't have the ability, consent as a fully formed adult, knowing all the variables and then making a decision. That doesn't happen with children, and our brains were egocentric. So basically, we think everything's our fault.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think I thought that, but, we kind of split off. Every human kind of has different parts where every age we've ever been and what we believe about it. We might have frozen trauma experiences embedded within us that we're just not dealing with or thinking affects us, not really making that connection. But of course, we look at symptoms to see if we're still being affected. But anyway, one day I was having some emotional flashback, like just this depression, pain. I'm like, what is going on? I was trying to do the work, and I saw myself in my mind's eye as this little girl. Like, what the heck is wrong with me? Why, whatever, just not feeling compassion for myself. And I felt a big switch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you know what? I couldn't have done any better. People that don't understand, they don't. But
Mm-hmm.
when you do understand how humans are and how they grow and develop, I literally couldn't have done any better.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, oh my gosh, I am proud of myself, and I love myself, and I like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that strongly.
Mm-hmm.
It's occasionally I might feel a little bit of a relapse, but not usually. So it was a big shift where I really got in touch with little Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
And I love her.
Mm-hmm.
I really do.
Mm. What's the most important thing that you have done and continue to do to maintain healing in your life?
Well, it's hard to say one thing, but let me say, I have lived in Arizona 10 years. I was a therapist when I moved here, but I did not learn about the technical term and how to do self-regulation until, as a mental health professional, I'm learning it from other mental health professionals in the field. Trauma therapy is sort of new, I feel. What I did before that was I needed to tell my story, and I journaled. I didn't want to at first. Nobody wants to. I'm like, yeah, but you really need to. And so I did that a lot, and I would just try to express it, and love myself. So I would have to say, ultimately, loving yourself. But the idea of self-regulation, inner child work, loving yourself, being able to sit with someone. Like I had a early therapist that had some idea about internal family systems, but he gave me a shaming message, like sometimes you hear in the field with therapists, ooh, vicarious traumatization. I don't want to hear that. Like, it's going to traumatize me. And look, I get it. I'm not always listening to other people's stories all the time. I have found it to be very helpful and healing and validating, but it's not. But as the therapist, right, that is what I do, but you have to have good self-care. And so that therapeutic relationship can be very healing, that attachment, having that experience with a person who knows how to treat you as you are speaking the hardest things you've ever spoken.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for being so open and honest, and I'm glad our intentions matched and were laid out during our conversation.
Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
It's very important.
If any of the content in this podcast has brought anything up for you, please reach out to your local, national or international helpline or speak to someone you trust.